Okay, so this is the first call, right? First one we've done. All right. So I'm looking at the agenda. Sam, did you want to go ahead and lead the discussion?
Sure. I mean, I think I'll mostly be, well, I guess do we want to do a stand-up? Apparently that's common in these working group meetings, but I don't know if it's necessary for this.
Well, I noticed that there are a few new names on here, people that I'm not familiar with, so we can maybe go around and do a quick round of introductions and then kind of say where we're coming from.
I think that's a great idea. Do we all have the same icon orders? Like, do we want to start top left, which would be Rod Bad?
Hopefully, I'll go ahead and call them out. So yeah, that way it just makes it easier. So on my list, I'm first. James Snell, CTC, TSC, work for IBM. Richard Ford, Nikita, you're next.
Sorry, I think I missed something. Could you repeat, please?
We can hear you. We're just doing quick introductions, like 2 or 3 sentences on who we are.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to do some security research in the node ecosystem. And some other minor things.
Colin?
My name's Colin Ehrig, and I'm a member of the CTC and TSC, and I work at Nearform during the day. That's about it.
Devin?
Hey, I'm Devin Rifkin. I work on node security stuff at Intrinsic.
Mateo? Mateo, are you there?
You're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you now.
Yeah. I am Matteo Collina. I work with Nearform as well. Same as Colin. I am part of the Streams working group.
Cool. Vladimir?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Vladimir Lechoken. I'm part of the Evangelist working group, and I work on RASP security for node.js at Screen in Paris.
Okay. Sam?
My name is Sam Roberts. I used to work for StrongLoop. I now work for IBM. And I work on Node, and I'm kind of a focus on the TLS and crypto layers right
now. Hopefully I pronounced it right. Dean?
Yep. Hey, I'm Dan. I'm an assistant professor at UC San Diego, working on security and now kind of looking at Node as one of the interesting things.
Johan?
Hey guys, I'm Johan Bergström. I run a startup called PageLoad, and I'm pretty connected to the infra and build group, and I also do a bit of work on like obscure platforms like FreeBSD and stuff.
Hitesh?
Hi, I'm Hitesh Kanatirtha. I work at Microsoft on node-related stuff, and I'm part of the Neutral API working group.
Brian?
Hey, I'm Brian English. I work at Intrinsic with Devin and Dan on node security things.
Okay. William?
Hey, this is William Kapke. I work for myself, and I participate in a lot of TSC stuff. In the list there, if you see a Beverly Hills number, that's me also. And one's my computer, one's my cell phone for audio reasons.
Okay. Miles?
Hey, I'm Miles Borns. I work at IBM, working on LTS primarily, as well as stability. Lots of stuff on Canary and the Gold Mine.
Michael Rogers.
Found the mute button. Awesome. Hey, I'm Michael Rogers. I work for the Node.js Foundation. Hello.
And then the number here, it's the 269-362 number. I'm not sure who that is. Somebody watching?
I'm right there. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I do bus finding. And I'm also driving. That's why it's like kind of weird, and I can't tell if anything's working.
All right, no problem. Okay, so I think that is everybody. This is the first call for the still being formed security work group. A couple things on the agenda. Two very specific things. We have the node security project coming into the foundation, so we kind of need to figure out where that fits in relation to what this working group is going to be doing and how they relate to one another. And then closely adjacent to that is the question of what exactly is this working group, and what is its scope going to be. I know there have been a number of conversations on that, but why don't we start? Michael, can you give us an update on where things are at with regards to the node security project coming into the foundation, and kind of what the foundation's view of how that fits and how it relates to things?
Yeah, I mean, so we have an agreement with Lyft Security for them to hand over the data and a couple of their resources. We're still working on that actual signed agreement, so that's not quite completed yet. But we have kind of gotten tacit board approval that this is something that we want to do. Essentially, all that means is that the place for reporting vulnerabilities in the ecosystem can move to something run by the foundation. That's essentially what that means. That's the only kind of top level decision that's really been made. The exact process for this hasn't been called out yet. We've discussed some of the limitations of the process, right? So for instance, we want to have one place that people report to, right? Just for simplicity's sake. That means that, we probably want to guard against a large number of people finding out about core vulnerabilities. So the people that do that initial kind of handoff of that probably should be from the core group, but not necessarily. We can talk about different processes behind that. It's really kind of up to this group, along with the core security group, to really figure out what the best process is for vetting vulnerabilities, for getting people to disclose vulnerabilities, and also for publishing the data around those vulnerabilities. And we expect that to be kind of an ongoing discussion. Yeah, there's not the sort of how we do this has not really been worked out, and we kind of want the contributors to the project to work that out rather than having some kind of top-down edict from the board.
Right. So there's been no view in terms of, as far as the board is concerned, about whether this is a separate top-level project, or is it, does it fall under the TSC's purview? Is it something that, TSC, CTC need to work with the node security project to figure out how it fits? I mean, what kind of process has been envisioned at the board level?
At the board level, none. So none of that has really been thought about at the board level or recommended at the board level. They're sort of going to lean on this group and the core project to figure out what the best thing to do there is. I will say, though, we have a security group in core that core has delegated some responsibility to. If we're going to, we don't have the ability to take that responsibility away from them without their consent. So if you know, this group wanted to, like, you know, infringe on something that the core security group was already doing, that would need to be a conversation with them as well. So I think that there does need to be a distinction there. You know, honestly, that security group is going to, you know, work well with this group. There's no kind of hostility there or anything like that. And at the end of the day, we really do want to have a separate group of people that are vetting core vulnerabilities, because it's a really particular skill set that we probably want to distinguish from ecosystem.
Right.
But yeah, that's the only kind of process level thing. I think, you know, in sort of informal conversations that we've had, I think me and Rod and a few other people just talking, like, our recommendation would be that we do a top level working group to start, something that directly reports to the TSC, because we really, like, the focus of this shouldn't be on core. The focus of this should be on the ecosystem stuff. And so the best place for that to happen would be directly at the TSC level and not just above the CTC with it. But I wouldn't jump to a lot of unnecessary structure like a top level project until you need it. So starting with a working group, you can do something much more informal. You can have, you know, much less people, and then as the group grows and maybe you want to break out subgroups and stuff like that, then you're going to want a project. And so you just want to add structure as you need it rather than trying to pre-plan for that structure. But that's just my recommendation.
Michael, that's where I kind of disagree with you, and only because there's an existing project out there that is being brought in, the Node Security Project, and there's data and the APIs and tangible IP that's around it, and so that is a project on its own. Now, it's not like it's being created from the ground up. It already exists, and so for the facilities that are available for us to use and leverage, a top level project makes sense. Now, that top level project can reside under the TSC just like core. It'd be alongside of it. And with a top level project comes a technical committee just like the TSC. I mean, that structure completely makes sense for every way that it's structured, in my opinion.
So I just want to, that may be accurate. I just want to walk back a couple things. So we're getting a set of data, but we're not getting, like, all of the people in process that was vetting that data. We're not taking on, like, that part of the project necessarily, because those were paid employees by Lyft Security for a long time, and we obviously aren't just going to get them. I think that some of those people will end up being involved, but ultimately, like, this is a new group, a new community, and a new process for dealing with this. So, like, this group is going to have to come up with that. I wouldn't get too caught up in the fact that you're sort of taking something that already existed, even though there is some data to start with there. It's very similar. Like, I don't know, I would classify it closer to something like when we took in NaN, or when we took in, you know, readable stream, and, like, these are, you know, sub repositories that had some code in them, but ultimately we found that working groups were the best way to facilitate that. And of course, like, they have code and they have, like, process inside of those working groups. There's nothing stopping a working group from having, like, a process similar to a TLP. I think the only reason that you would want a TLP is if you immediately want to spin off multiple working groups. And I don't know if that's the case yet, right? Like, do you want subgroup already? Is there, like, so many people and so much work that you're looking at that you want to create a subgroup? Or are you just worried and you want the ability to create the subgroups really quickly, and that's why you want a TLP? Because that would be reasonable too. But if you don't want that, there's really no difference between a working group and a TLP.
Well, I think the difference for me is that NaN is just code, and a fairly small thing, whereas the data and the APIs and the vetting, I mean, there's already a bunch of individual pieces to the Node Security Project. And I don't have a big dog in the fight here at all. So I'm just looking at it abstractly from what I see out there and what I see being into the puzzle. That's all.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, like, what exactly this work group or project, whatever it ultimately ends up being, is going to be responsible for. And is the main thing that I understand it to be is essentially maintain, a couple of things. One is maintaining essentially a vulnerability database for projects that fall under the foundation, including core, as well as for the ecosystem, right? Maintaining that database of vulnerabilities and making that available for others. And then secondary to that, or as part of that, is defining the policies and procedures for handling those vulnerabilities, dealing with disclosures, figuring out what the reporting of those things will be, and then from there, promoting improvement of security practices across the ecosystem, both within core and within the ecosystem. So in terms of that vulnerability database, that is being bootstrapped by the contribution of the Node Security Project. Correct, Michael?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. But as far as how they have managed those and the resources they put into actually doing that scanning and that kind of thing, that none of that is coming over.
Correct. And we need to think about it a little bit differently too, because we're going to be taking in information from multiple vendors, whereas they were a vendor, creating this data set. So that's just something to consider as we start to build it out.
So the project here, or whatever the code is, whatever else, it's essentially whatever infrastructure is necessary for hosting that database of vulnerabilities and making it available, and then the whatever infrastructure is necessary around the disclosure and reporting. Yes.
Can I also add that I think it would be useful to actually have a process for one interacting with people that actually report things, like have it, in addition to detect like an actual process and like actual policies for doing this. So I think like that seems to me like that alone is also quite a bit of work. And like whatever you said, I completely agree with. I think all those things are actually interesting and like really useful to do.
Yeah, I wouldn't underestimate the amount of like process that's going to need to be written and maintained. Like a lot of security work is literally just like creating the process, running that process by different people, adhering to it. Like, yeah, I mean, dealing with disclosures is difficult.
There's also, Adam Baldwin told me there's an ISO process for being a vulnerability coordinator, which means we might have to dig into some ISO process documentation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as worried about it. So we've had a couple of these kinds of things come up in the past, and they usually end up being subsets of what we're already doing. Like, they're really targeting this at projects that are incredibly bad at this kind of stuff. Like this came up when we did the badging program with CII, which is like they literally had shit in there like, your source repository should be public. They're clearly targeting this at like a selection of the software, the open source ecosystem that is like really, really bad at just general kind of project stuff. But yeah, we should definitely look at the ISO standard and make sure that we comply to it. But I think that at the end of the day, we'll end up with a superset.
Yeah. So now in terms of the vulnerability database, Rod has mentioned before that, this may just be kind of a front end to creating CVEs, right? Where when one of the vulnerability comes in, we just, this group, as part of the process, we just open CVEs on behalf of the various projects that are involved and use that mechanism, that process. So I'm wondering,
I think that there's a couple other things that we need to worry about. So, for instance, like we really want this data to map well on top of NPM. So there's just metadata that we need to make sure that we capture, so that people can build tooling on top of packages and on top of NPM that exposes that well. Right. I think that like whatever data format that we figure out and put this in, it should be able to export a CVE, and we should be able to send that to the CVE database as well. But we do want to make this like more useful than just CVE to our ecosystem, right?
Has the Node Security project, have they made any of the code available for how they're currently hosting their database vulnerabilities?
Yes. Let me see here. Oh man, that is not.
I don't know if they did that, but Baldwin said that what they're donating to us, I mean, if there's open source hosting code available, of course it would be available, I guess, if it had an open source license. But what they're specifically donating is a JSON database dump.
Yeah, so there's a JSON database dump, but there's also tooling to interface with that data.
But they're not giving that to us.
Well, they're not giving it to us, but it's open source, so it's like we can literally look at that. I mean, the thing about the database is that it's actually currently not open source licensed. It's not openly licensed. Like it's under a, like you have to license it from Lyft Security. So we're getting that, and then we're going to license it openly. But anything that's in the open source ecosystem, we can obviously just kind of leverage and use.
Okay. Now, is there any kind of timeline for when they're going to make that contribution where we could actually get access to the code, any code, or what the databases are?
I can get with them in January. Obviously, a lot of this stuff is on hold at the end of December because everybody just kind of takes off. But we need to finish up the last of the legal work, and then they should be able to hand it over pretty easily. We can also probably get a data dump from them before all the paperwork is done. We just won't technically have the license yet, but that'll unblock us at the very least.
You will have to review that before open sourcing that, of course.
Yes. But before we publish the data, we need to get the licensing locked down.
Right.
Also, and like, this is just kind of a side conversation, but like there's a lot of work going on right now to try and figure out how to openly license data. There's actually not very good licenses right now for data specifically. So what we'll probably end up doing is publishing it under a license in the short term and then changing the license sometime later.
I was not talking about the license. We will have to review the data being published, I think.
Sorry, what?
The data is not public now, yes? Is that correct?
The data is not public yet. I believe it was at some point, though.
But we will have to review the actual data before publishing it, probably.
Yeah. They're going to do that.
Okay. So I think a significant part of this work then is, obviously once we get the data, if they're not providing the code for actually making it available, actually hosting the data, then we're going to have a project to figure out what how are we hosting the data, right?
I mean, I don't think that we should overthink that. I think that it should just go into GitHub. I mean, they're just JSON files. We should just write them into GitHub.
That can be a little bit hard for programmatic access, I think.
Well, yeah, but it's like really easy to write something that pulls the data out of there and puts it into any database, right? Like we don't want to make the choice about databases ahead of time. Like, I mean, I can write a tool in a minute that'll stick it into CouchDB. That's easy.
It's how much of that work do we want to do, or how much of that, how much of that burden do we want to put users of the data, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that so if we write some kind of tool that publishes a JSON file to like our normal kind of downloads page that's all like cached in CDN and whatnot, we can write that tool. But in terms of just managing the data and like having multiple contributors editing the data, like that should just go into GitHub, right? Like we don't want to have to like recreate a bunch of process and tooling and getting different people accounts to try to manipulate a database.
Right.
As part of this initiative, are we doing some sort of public API so that vendors and companies can hook into to ask, for example, has this package deprecation, or we just provide the JSON dump and then they need to process it and build their tool around it?
So I think that that'll evolve over time. I will say that, like, I think that on this issue, some of the project people and even maybe the board will have a little bit of an opinion, in that we should have a similar relationship to this that we do to, say, tracing and debugging, where we try to do everything that we can at the most base layer to enable an ecosystem. So if we need to build more tooling and better things for people to then be able to build more value as vendors, that's fine. But we don't want to, like, go off and write our own really high level debugging utilities that sort of like stamp out a bunch of ecosystem and competition, right? I think that the balance that we have in the debugging tools is really good, actually. Like, we're actually taking in a bunch of new tools and writing a bunch of new ones now, but all of them are sort of geared towards enabling greater tooling to be built by the ecosystem itself. So.
Okay, so a couple questions. How are we hosting, or let's see, when are we getting access to data? What is the license for using that data? How are we going to host it? How easy do we want to make getting it and using it? Using that data. Okay. How do we enable the ecosystem to build tools on top? Okay. So that all goes towards the maintaining and making available the data. The other question, it regards the policies for responsible disclosure, right? So what are we drawing on from here with regards to the policies for disclosure? There's obviously going to be a large library of existing material for us to draw from. I don't know how much of this we actually need to create.
I mean, we could probably start with the process for core, right? And just go from there.
Some of the folks that are on the call here that have dealt with this and have thought about this, what do y'all think in terms of policies, and is there anyone that you would recommend? Anything that has worked well, not worked well?
Can I? So me and Fraser have worked on a few and tried to disclose a few core vulnerabilities, or what we think are vulnerabilities. And I think one of the things that needs to happen is it's not just this is the process. It's like, I think like somebody, and probably this group should be that somebody, needs to actually specify what is the attacker model and what is considered to be a security bug as opposed to just a bug. And I think like when one actually does this, like we should err on the side of things being or having security impact, not just standalone, but like bugs that can be used to escalate other kinds of bugs. So I think like actually like thinking hard about the threat model and how different bugs would fit into these models will probably take some time. I mean, I think there might be like other language runtimes that we can look at to follow after, but we can also actually say like, hey, we actually care about security and we might actually be willing to consider like a more serious attacker model than other languages are. Maybe not, right? Like, I guess that depends on like whatever you guys think. But that, and I think like communication with the public is important, like an email list where there's no clear person or people responsible or like allowed to speak on behalf of the group is what was, at least when they responded to me, like very hard to understand what was actually going on. So I didn't know like if I'm talking to a representative of whatever committee, but like actually like making that super clear upfront to people that are trying to report would be really useful, I think, and like whatever process they should go through. And I think like erring on the side of like this might have security implications is to me always better than not. But like having all this stuff be clear is super important.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say like that's all like a really good point, and we should really look into that. All I'll say is that we may, in fact, I think it's likely that we'll be one of the first projects dealing with this at this level, and that there won't be a lot to draw on, unfortunately. I don't know of another language that takes responsibility for the security of its ecosystem like this. I don't know of another open source project that even has as good of a policy as we have in core. And what we're talking about now is actually a much better policy and a lot of really good stuff about kind of the one-to-one communication stuff. I bet that there are corporations that have really good policies around this that are totally closed. And there are companies that take responsibility for the security of their ecosystem, like in .NET, to the same degree, but we don't have access to those policies.
And for me, the hardest problem in dealing with vulnerabilities for the old ecosystem is that there is the true possibility that the author of a package with a known vulnerability disappears or doesn't want to fix the vulnerability. And this is the major difference between what core is currently doing and what this group should deal about. So that is one of the major policies, one of the major topics we will need to cover in the next maybe months or so is how to deal with those cases.
Yeah, so let me just ask, like, we've actually identified some pretty clear-cut, like, areas of work that need to happen. Is it people's opinion right now that, like, there are areas that they definitely will and won't be involved in and that it's already broken up to that point? I mean, there's actually a surprising number of people already in this call and involved, so I'm just asking, like, I mean, I know that I was pushing for no unnecessary structure, but if we're already at the point where there are certain people that don't want to be bothered with certain aspects of this, then it might be good to already break a couple of repositories off for it.
I think we need to break down the topics better over the next. I think it might take 1 or 2 meetings just for us to get a clear idea of what the different things we're going to be working on, because there are a bunch of things that have come up in this call, but they're not super clear. Like it's hard to put your name right beside them. I mean, the NSPs thing starts to merge into the vulnerability reporting thing, which starts to merge into the threat model, so it's not clear where one starts and one ends.
Yeah, I mean, there's a variety of aspects of it. I mean, there's obviously the reporting. There's, how are we going to handle advisories if we're going to be handling advisories? Yeah, it's just, I think probably just taking a week or two to kind of think through is a good idea. Maybe have another call in early January. And see if by that time we can have a concrete list of the specific work areas, and then get folks to put their names next to which ones they want to work on. That seem reasonable?
I think so. I guess like the one thing that maybe it was already clear, but I think that I see 2 categories already, which is one is core and one is the ecosystem. And I think right within each there's plenty to do, but and I think that they should be related because it's like I think it's really nice to actually try to do both, right? Like I think since nobody's actually trying, like no other language is actually trying to do this, this is actually pretty cool and unique. But nevertheless, I think like one can probably be done like way faster and easier than the other, right? So if there are policies and tooling for dealing with core, they could probably be used for the rest of the ecosystem. But there's like other hard things to do deal with the ecosystem when it comes down to like actually contacting authors and dealing with licensing and all those other things.
Now, the one thing I have not heard, and I just want to clarify to make sure everyone's kind of on the same page on this. This project is not going to be getting into the business of going out and actively searching for vulnerabilities and doing scanning and then developing the patches for remediating issues, right? We're still leaving those to the individual corporate players that are already involved in that.
Well, it depends. So, if somebody approaches us and says, like, "Hey, we have this," like the fuzz testing thing that the Google's do, right? If somebody has something like that, and they're like, "We need to be able to work with a community to disclose these vulnerabilities to," we would be open. I think that we should be open to working with them. That said, all of that should work its way through the same process as if it were anything from the outside. Also, in terms of writing patches for vulnerabilities, working with the maintainers of each of the open source libraries is something that we're going to have to do. Like, we're going to have to reach out to them. We're going to have to talk with them. If it's easier to write a patch than to try to get them to do it, it may actually be worth it for the people dealing with that communication to just write it.
I'm trying to figure out if that's going to be something that the foundation is actually going to be putting a resource into, to saying, hey, we will do active scanning for vulnerabilities. Or is it going to be more this thing came up. If we have time to have somebody look at it, then somebody volunteers to provide a patch. That's different than saying that the foundation is actively going to be putting a resource into it.
I would say that until this group says that they want to do that, we're not going to sign them up for it. That said, Core does sign up for this kind of stuff already. But that's specific to Core.
For some things, yeah. When it comes to, we know that we're going to do a breaking change, we'll go out and folks will actively go out and open PRs and stuff to fix those. But that's on a more case by case basis.
No, we've actually pursued free accounts for scanning tools that feed into the security group. We've applied to Google's program for fuzz testing as well. Like there are official programs and actually proprietary software that we get free licenses for that we actually do use and feed into the security group. But that's all specific to Core. And yeah, if this group wants to do that at some point for the ecosystem, then I'm sure that this foundation would support it if the group feels like they have the resources to do that. But the foundation isn't going to go sign them up for a bunch of that work.
Right. Anything that we haven't discussed that anyone wants to? Great.
Yeah, I think before we're done, I think we should discuss what's next.
So definitely, in terms of the more immediate, what's next? Getting another call set up in January, maybe the first or second week in January, and then figuring out what regular cadence do we want for calls.
Should we stick to every 2 weeks this time until we decide otherwise?
That works for me. Why don't we get an issue open for the next meeting, and then we can give folks the chance to weigh in if that's going to work for them or not. And then between now and then, trying to get some greater clarity on what the specific work areas are, so folks can their name down.
I'd like to see some sample of the JSON data. I think once we have that and some idea whether we can even post an example of it in the working group issues, then it can serve as a seed for discussing what we're gonna do with it. And we need to get Adam Baldwin in one of the meetings.
Yeah. Michael, has Adam talked about, wanting to be more directly involved? In like the working group, or is he wanting to take a more hands-off approach?
I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think that he doesn't want to be like dictating what it is, but he does want to contribute and have kind of valuable content. And he feels like he has valuable contributions to bring in. I think that definitely for the rest of the month he's doing family stuff. So that's probably why he's not here. But I would expect him to get a little bit more involved in January.
He told me that he wanted to be involved as best he can, but yeah, he's not through the Christmas holidays.
Okay. So we can definitely try to get him here. Anything else?
If no one else has anything, I tried to record the audio for this for publishing on YouTube if nobody objects. Not positive the audio will come out, but if you object, please let me know. Okay.
So I have one thing. So we talked about mostly, so there's a couple things we talked about. One is, so there's NSP data. We need to figure out what it is, receive it, what we're going to do with it. And that will depend a little bit on what the data looks like, so we'll know more hopefully next meeting. The other things there was a lot of things that were discussed. Oh, I think kind of independent of that data and its format, I think is a question of how we receive vulnerability reports, and if we do want to receive vulnerability reports for the ecosystem, and if so, should it be the same security@node.js.org mailing list, or should it be a different one, and how should the communication work? I think that's almost a separate conversation, the how will we manage reporting and responding to vulnerabilities. I can open that as an issue and ask people to comment on it, like people who have more experience with this, like Dan, you obviously had some good feedback on it.
Yeah, that'd be a really good one to have an issue on, just because we want to pull the core security group into that conversation as well, but not necessarily into every other conversation.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess also, just to add to that, I guess I could just comment on the issue, but it seems like the project is mature enough to having an actual, I don't know, Bugzilla-like thing or whatever, Google's actually using. Might be a good way to suggest to the security groups to do instead of a mailing list, but that's just my 2 cents.
But Bugzilla as opposed to GitHub issues, or?
No, so one reporting security at Node.js was to an outsider like a black hole. So I have no idea, like for example, who would read the issue, if the person is the right person responding, if other people have comments. So I think like having an issue tracker like a system to report bugs and handle these cases. It also means that like some of us like can chime in on other people's reporting and things like that, as opposed to like trying to deal with it over email. But that might make life easier and clearer for people.
Yeah, like what's that software that everybody uses for tech support now? Like I know that NPM uses it. I forget the name of it, but essentially like sort of help desk-ish support would be really nice, just because like then people are using this really official system to communicate with you privately when you log something, and so that you're not just getting like a random person coming back to you.
So the other thing that's nice about having a tracker is once the vulnerability is actually disclosed, or if it's decided that it's not a security vulnerability, that the issue can become public. So that's used in a lot of other projects. When dealing with security stuff, you mark an issue as private until you know enough about it to decide whether it can and when it should be public.
Interesting.
It's interesting. So I don't know if it's obvious, but there is a GitHub repo that contains vulnerability information, but it's completely private to the security response team for obvious reasons. And I guess the limitation there is GitHub doesn't allow you to selectively make public individual issues. So what I'm hearing is that you guys are suggesting we need some sort of vulnerability tracker where we can selectively make issues public so they can be seen by the person who reported them and then eventually become completely public for the historical record. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I think this also like would really help feedback into like academic research that would potentially build like, so we have like static analysis for like Node. And if we like knew that there were like things you guys found before and flagged them, we can write a more general tool more easily to actually help find similar kinds of vulnerabilities in other parts of the code base. And like you guys are talking about the ecosystem, right? You can imagine like that scaling out even more.
Okay. So I think then the main to do over the next couple of weeks again is just documenting what each of these main work items are. So let's have a goal of when we have the next meeting in a couple of weeks. We have the list of what those things are, and we have a rough idea of who's interested in doing what. And then when we get back together, we can actually put together, start digging in on the actual line items. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay.
If we're good there, I just wanted to ask William. I know that you're listening to these comments about kind of the making selective parts of the private or public and stuff like that. Is this something that we might be able to work into the GitHub automation stuff that we've been doing?
That's kind of what I was running through my head. How we could maybe make a private public interface, some kind of thing where the bot does the publishing or something like that. It would be an interesting challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly
interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's fairly easy to create a new issue even in a private repo from an email. We have like a bunch of email automation stuff worked in already. So yeah, I think this might be.
So we have a challenge there. The challenge there is, I mean, if we just have a private GitHub repo that has all of these vulnerabilities in it, who has access to that, and how do we, is there going to be a need to segment off part of that to limited audience? Like, I may have access to vulnerabilities that deal with core, but I may not have access to vulnerabilities that deal with some other part of the ecosystem from project that I don't necessarily have any reason seeing their vulnerabilities for, right? So how do we actually control access to that private repo? There's ways we can do that. We can encrypt, use encryption for various parts of that, but it just ends up increasing the complexity of it. So I'm just kind of questioning whether a private GitHub repo is actually the right place to do it.
I mean, the thing is as soon as we go into another tool, we have to reestablish all of the accounts and identity, and we're still going to have to worry about segmenting the stuff, right? Like, it's not like we get out of that if we go to a different tool.
We could always, I was thinking about this earlier, we could always do a similar solution as to what we do in the secrets repo, where we use GPG encryption and just share it with a appropriate amount of people.
I mean, I'm a little bit worried about like the level of, if we start getting a lot of vulnerabilities, we actually do need a lot of people with access to the data in order to just effectively vet all of them. So I'm a little bit worried in like making the tool chain really complicated, just because it's going to create a barrier to people actually being able to get the work done.
I'm worried about that too, but I don't know if building our own tooling on top of GitHub is like building our own, basically our own issue tracker facade on top of GitHub is the right way to go. Looking for an existing one.
Well, no, it wouldn't. It wouldn't be that. I mean, like, essentially, what it would do is we'd use GitHub's issue tracker, and things would get posted in this private repo. And then when we decided that we needed to disclose the vulnerability, we would have the bot essentially post a new public issue somewhere with all the information in it.
So sorry. So I think that's not generally a good idea, right? Because if I'm reporting something, I'd actually like even be willing to help you fix the bug. And I'm talking here like me general and like you general, right? So like I think that like if I'm reporting something to your private repo and I'm not part of this private repo, then it really disincentivizes people from like actually trying to do this, right? There's like if you look at Chrome CVEs, there are like, you know, repeated people who like do this because they've probably built tools and they're like really helpful to the Chrome team. I think like you want to leverage like security researchers and other people to like report things, like almost do part of the work for you. Like a granularity of GitHub repos is just too coarse-grained.
No, in that case, it would be the granularity of a single issue. So, like that issue is reported by a person that comes in via email, so we have their email, and then we just have the bot email them all of the comments as they come in for that issue.
Well, yeah, but now we're building I don't know. I mean, like Dan says, that the person who reported it would probably want to be able to, you know, comment on that single issue and get email about it. And that's not something the GitHub issue tracker supports. How are we going to
we already have, we actually already have some automation around email using what's it called? I forget the API. But we already have some code to deal with this in a certain way. So like, it's actually not that hard for when an email comes into security at creating an issue in GitHub. And then it's also not that hard for a GitHub bot to know when new comments are posted in that and to send them via email to somebody. And when somebody responds to that email, have the email code actually post another comment in that particular issue. I mean, it's code and it's like going to take a little bit of time to write, but it's actually not that hard.
Maybe we should move this conversation out to GitHub.
yeah, I was thinking, you know, it's we're 5 minutes over the hour, so let's. It doesn't sound like we have any shortage of things to discuss. So I think we're good to go. Okay. Alrighty. We'll talk to you all later, and y'all have a good holiday. In a couple weeks.
Good.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.